True Crime Screening Room is a presentation of Podcast Picks with Jim the Podcast Sherpa. Please keep in mind that some of the topics discussed might be too intense for younger or sensitive listeners. Even Jim the Podcast Sherpa conducts some of these interviews while hiding under his desk, all while holding a stuffed mountain lion named Mr. Wubby.
Welcome to True Crime Screening Room, the podcast featuring interviews with creators who dedicate their work to unraveling true crime mysteries. We're now entering the investigation room in the Sherpa Chalet to meet your host, Jim the Podcast Sherpa.
Hello there, Rebels of the Sherpolution, and welcome to True Crime Screening Room. It is a side project of Podcast Picks with Jim the Podcast Sherpa. That's me. And I'm coming to you from Sherpaloo Studios here in the Sherpa Chalet, high atop Mount Podcastia, where I overlook the millions and millions of podcasts that are out there. But these are the shows where we get to talk true crime, and I get to talk to a lot of true crime creators and authors and people along those fields. And I know how true crime is very popular. And actually, that statement applies very much to my guest today. Her name is Heather Mroczenski. She's coming to us from Wisconsin. And she has a new book out called Blueprint of a Killer, Monsters in the Making from Childhood to Murder. Now, Heather is actually a behavioral analyst. And she is a huge fan of true crime, and self-admittedly as well. I'm not creating a scenario here. And she wanted to take her skills as a behavioral analyst and apply them to the actions of serial killers. And she wrote a book, and it's written in a really unique style. We do talk about that in our chat, so I hope you do check it out. Super nice to talk to, very dedicated to her profession. She actually works with autistic children when she's not delving into true crime cases. Two separate worlds for her, I promise you, Rebels. But we got to talk a little bit about her book and some of the cases in the book and about what she does as well. This is a really interesting deep dive into understanding behavior. And that's really what her book does, in addition to telling the stories of some of these serial killers. And when she gets into the behavioral analysis, it's not too heavy, so it's not like you're going to be confused while you're reading it. She really puts it in layman's terms so you can understand it and really follow along with her. And you can see the points that she's making in her book. And it's actually doing pretty well already upon its release in Amazon's charts. And the book is also doing well for Blue Wave Press, who are always so helpful in finding me great guests like Heather. And they've always had a lot of nice things to say about me, so I really appreciate it. So thank you, Blue Wave Press. And we're going to hear from Heather Mroczenski in the investigation room in the Sherpa Chalet right about now. Hello there, Rebels. We are here in the investigation room in the Sherpa Chalet. My guest today is Heather Mroczenski. She's coming to us from Wisconsin, the dairy state. Yes, she's here. She is the author of a new book, and we just found out that actually Heather didn't even know this. I was looking, which is currently number 9 on Amazon Serial Killer Books. The book is titled Blueprint of a Killer, Monsters in the Making from Childhood to Murder. Heather, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Now, I think you're the first guest that I've ever had from Wisconsin.
Wow. You know, if I was here a month ago, I would have been from Nashville, Tennessee. So
That's right. I've had people from Tennessee. Now, are people as gaga for dairy as they're made out to be, or it's probably no different from
Hey,
anywhere
you
else?
know what is actually really funny? First of all, I make fun of my husband because he'll have milk for all his meals, and that's so weird. He grew up on a dairy farm, but
Oh,
his,
okay.
brother and sister-in-law will buy, like, 3 gallons of milk for their family for 1 week, and I'm like, "I can't finish 1 gallon of milk in a month. I just can't." So, yeah, they are.
I put a little in my tea, and then that's pretty much about it each day.
Yeah. Yep. I put it in my protein shake, and that's all I need.
Okay. Well, we'll need some of our dairy, right?
Yeah.
Okay. See if we can give nutritional advice while we're doing a true crime podcast.
Yes,
Now, you are by trade a behavioral analyst.
correct.
Now, could you explain like what a behavioral analyst does?
Yeah, so, it's in the field of applied behavior analysis. It's basically like a scientific approach to understanding behavior
Mhm.
by looking at, what happens before and after a behavior. And so I currently work with kids with autism
Okay.
and have for the last 8 years, so that is my specific field of ABA, applied behavior analysis, as a BCBA.
And because I mean, you don't really, up until the book, you hadn't really done it for anything about serial killers or anything like that.
No, I tried. I emailed my local in Nashville, I emailed the local FBI, and I was like, "Hey, this is my field, this is my credentials, and I love researching, like, serial killers. Can I work for you?" Never got a response.
Oh.
So, joke's on them.
And even in the book, by your own admission, you are a true crime lover.
Yeah, mhm.
Were there any true crime podcasts that you listen to, or just all of them? You sample them? What's your
I
listening
mean,
like?
yours, of course.
Oh, thank you.
I've always really enjoyed the Wondery podcast.
Uh-huh.
So until they made it was like pay to play after that. But before when it was all free, I really enjoyed listening to all of those. And of course, every like, true crime or just serial killer-esque TV show and movie on Netflix that you can imagine I've seen. So
Yeah, the reason that I ask is, I guess you know why I'm asking, because you were inspired by the style of a certain podcast on
yes.
Wondery, and that
Yes.
that really reflects the style of the book.
Yeah, yeah. It was really interesting listening to I can't remember the name of it now. Do you know the name of it?
I thought I wrote it down. I did not.
Of course, it's completely blanking, but it was about was it This Imagined Life? It was something like that.
Yes,
Is that
yes.
what it was? Okay. Yeah. So it was super interesting because they would take these like famous people, like the one I remember was Elon Musk. And so you would hear this whole entire podcast about Elon Musk or whoever it was. And you were just like, me and my husband listened to it in the car. And so we were just guessing the whole time, like who we thought it was. And then we were shocked to find out who it was. And it was years ago that we listened to that. And
Mhm.
I still think about it. And I really, really liked it. So I did. When I was writing my book, I wanted to write it through like a unique lens. And so I used that. And so the first 2 or 3 chapters of it's broken up into 10 sections. So 10 different serial killers. And the first 2 to 3 chapters is you're blindfolded is what I call it. So
Right.
the reader doesn't know who they're reading about, which I think is fun because then you're looking at it and you don't have all those preconceived notions about, oh, well, I grew up in here, so I know all about this person. You're able to learn something new without, like I said, those preconceived notions about them.
Yeah, I mean, you're telling like a flat out story, and it's like, and guess who it applies to at the
Yeah.
end? That little twist.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, and I think even writing like that, I know you said you weren't doing any other books, but that really does kind of open up the door for you if you wanted to do more and more.
Yeah,
More
I was
serial
thinking
killers.
that too. It's definitely like if this is a hit, I could unfortunately because there's so many of them, I could write a bunch of these and just keep going because there's, so many serial killers out there.
Yeah, unfortunately, I know that's being the operative word.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you didn't use this podcast as an inspiration for your book, because I don't think bad jokes and serial killers would work that well. I think you were kind of safer that way. Why did she write that? I don't want to get you in any trouble, Heather. So you said that you discussed 10 different serial killers, and some of them I'd never heard of. I mean, mean, there were some that were very
tried.
well known, and others were like, "Oh, I've never heard this one."
Yeah, I didn't want to make them well known. I have 3, I think, super well known ones that everyone has heard of,
Mhm.
and I hadn't heard of most of the rest.
Uh-huh.
And I don't really want to say their names, I don't want people to read them.
Okay.
But if you want to talk about 1 or 2, that's okay. But yeah, I kind of intentionally did that. It was hard because I was trying to find people who were well known enough that there was information about them. Like every single serial killer, I read at least 1 book about them. Like I tried to find primary sources.
Mhm.
And did for the most part. And so if there's like a book about someone, then they have to be known in some way. There was one woman that I wrote about who was she was super interesting, and I was like, I have to write about her. But it was really hard to find information about her because she was from the 1800s. So there was like next to no information about her childhood. And I had to dig really hard.
She was the woman from Denmark, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. That was actually one of the ones I hadn't heard of either.
Yeah, yeah. But it was super interesting with her because I love the concept of, she was so most of the serial killers in the book, and if you read this, you'll realize this, most of them, they had some kind of terrible assault, like abuse, trauma in their childhood. And that is kind of the whole point of the book is like the how much a childhood impacts people.
Right.
And childhood development, the importance of that. And that's also like with me, the field that I work in, it all goes hand in hand.
Sure. Yeah.
But she was interesting because as far as we know, she didn't have any childhood trauma. Like, she had a boyfriend at age 17 who kicked her in the stomach and made her abort her baby. But as far as we know, as far as history knows, that was like as bad as it got.
Right.
Which is bad.
Yeah.
But
right. No, I
she
know
was
you're not minimizing.
17.
Yeah.
She was 17 at that point. So like she was a fully formed, almost adult. Whereas most of the other ones, they had like pretty significant trauma. But her whole like the drive, the motivation between her murders was for riches, money.
Mhm. Right.
And then what I thought was not funny, but funny, unique,
Right.
was how she put out like wanted like personal ads in the newspaper to find men who were rich
Right.
and to come like live with her. And I was just like, how unique? Like how did she come up with that?
And yet she did.
And yet she did. And yeah, infamous.
Yeah. When you write about the different killers and the trauma that they experience in their lives, it's amazing because you kind of set it up to be almost like a one-way door. And what I mean by that is these killers had these traits, but because somebody has these traits, that doesn't mean that they're going to be a serial killer.
Correct.
So it's essentially how you recover from that trauma.
Yeah.
I guess, well, part of it anyway.
Yeah, definitely. So there's so many people. And honestly, it's sad that serial killers are so popular to write about, like to read about. And I'm completely at fault for this, obviously. But really it's the people who, they've been through all of that trauma. Like you just interviewed the author of the Tylenol Killers.
Right, Joseph
And
Ciavelli.
he had been through all of that trauma and abuse and turned out like completely different. He could have, there were a couple paths he could have gone down, and he did not go down the path of any of my serial killers or of his father.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting, and it's actually so amazing that people could do that. But it has, I credit him. Like he obviously had to go through a lot of therapy, I'm sure, and deal with that in his own ways. But when it comes to the serial killers that I wrote about, and I think the majority of serial killers who deal with that kind of trauma, it's also it has to do with the like psychology, the brain, the amygdala, all of that, but also the environment that they were raised in and learning history and how they paired like the violent tendencies to the trauma that happened in their past.
Yeah, it's all in the processing. I mean, when you talk about Joe, I don't remember if he said it in the interview or in our conversation afterward. And he said, I didn't want to be a victim after all of that.
Yeah.
He wanted to move forward with his life. And the fact that he knew that he needed help, that's the simplest thing, I guess, that someone can do.
Yeah. And another woman that I wrote about, she had a pretty terrible past. And one of the things I found interesting was I was researching her on Reddit, or not on Reddit. I was researching her and I saw a comment on Reddit where someone said she's like the only serial killer I've ever felt bad for. She had a terrible, terrible past, a lot of abuse, a lot of sexual abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And what you just said about Joe
Yeah.
made me think of her because, she could have taken the path of like gaining control in her life by getting help, but she took control of her life. Her whole goal was taking control of her life, and she did it by killing men who she thought were going to do to her what her father did to her, and like the men in her life had done to her. And so instead of going the path of trying to gain control by, going to therapy, putting herself in a different environment, when she felt like she was going to be hurt again, she started murdering the men who she thought was going to hurt her.
Mm-hmm. When you were doing your research, had you come across any that kind of deviated from that pattern, or they really all kind of fell into line with all that, with the abuse and the trauma?
No,
the
there were
violence?
two. There were two of them. 2 of the 10 that did not, from what I could find, have any abuse, and that I kept them in there because it's important to know that not everyone that is a serial killer is that way because of terrible parents.
Right.
But it's sobering. It's hard to wrap my mind around the fact that you can have a just fine childhood and still turn out to be a mass murderer. So that was important to write about, but hard, I think, to stomach for me because my whole thesis is child development. Like it's so important to have,
Right.
healthy parents and to be raised in a loving and feel that love. And there were people who were raised by healthy parents who felt that love and who still turned out the way they did.
Mm-hmm. A while back, I actually spoke to John Hinckley Jr., the man who shot President Reagan.
Yes.
And in his book, in the early portion of the book, I can probably give this part away, it was like his memoir. And he said people would always ask him, or they presumed, oh, he had a horrible childhood, or oh, he had a drug problem. He said, no.
Yeah.
He said, my parents were wonderful and I didn't, I still don't do drugs and I never really have.
Yeah.
But it's amazing that people just make that presumption. But it was really the mental illness that took its toll on him, and he didn't really, get help for it.
Yeah.
And that's really what led to all of his action.
Yeah, definitely. There's always that question of is psychosis, is being a serial killer, is that nature or nurture? And it can be a combination. And most of the time, I think it is a combination of both. It's those genetics, size of the amygdala. It's the parents having those mental disorders. And then it's also the environment you were raised in. 6 out of the 10 serial killers I wrote about were sexually assaulted as kids, were physically abused, were emotionally abused, were neglected. And so it's that combination of the nature and the nurture.
Okay. You mentioned the word, and I was wondering if we could get scientific for a minute. You talk about the amygdala. I know that's part of the brain.
Yeah.
How exactly is that affecting behavior and everything?
So, okay, I'm really worried that someone on your podcast is going to correct me. So this is baseline knowledge. Everyone has 2 amygdala, and it controls emotions. It controls your
impulses.
Yeah, it controls and processing fear and empathy and all of that.
Okay.
And so in serial killers, or what they've found is in psychopaths, they will have smaller amygdala, so less of that ability to empathize,
right,
process, to have to fear, to have social cues, that kind of thing.
Right. And they call a lot of those people sociopaths because there's no empathy. They just, they just act on raw emotion on whatever they're feeling.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. You see, we have a little bit of science in here too.
I know.
See, these rebels, you are learning a lot in this episode. Right. There's currently a case going on right now with a serial killer that was arrested named Rex Uerman. He was the Gilgo Beach killer.
I am not following that. I'm going to have to.
He's on Long Island. They believe that he murdered a lot of sex workers.
Okay.
And stuff like that. So they haven't really given much information on his background. I guess, you're not going to see that on the news and stuff like that. That's probably stuff for the trial and all that. But I mean, that fact that it was sex workers, that probably indicates that maybe there was a sexual issue when he was younger. It could have been anything. It could have been either he was molested or maybe rejected by women or, because I know a lot of times when I talk to some of the authors, when they talk about the men who kill the sex workers, they say it's always a power thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's one specific serial killer that killed, he killed men who were gay because he was gay himself and he thought that was evil and disgusting. And so he killed gay men as they were him. He was like killing himself over and over and over again by killing someone else. And so it could also be like a disgust. It could be power. It could be control. It could be like, I'm disgusted with myself. And so I'm going to kill you because you make me think of what I hate about myself or about my mother or about my sister, someone who me.
It's amazing that it goes that deep in their psyche that, that they view their victims like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it is. And that kind of goes back to like the science of behavior stuff. So we have something called stimulus pairing. And basically it's the idea where something like, for instance, if the mother repeatedly sexually assaulted the child, you have the mom that's repeatedly sexually assaulted the son. So you have that gross abuse. Terrible. He didn't want it, but also it felt good. And so he has that inner conflict of like, my mom is exerting control over me. This is painful. This hurts. I feel disgusted with her and disgusted with myself, but it also feels good. And over time, those two things, they pair together. And so eventually it becomes where the violence of, he gets older and he starts doing that same thing to other people. And the violent act of raping and killing becomes sexually arousing to him. And he doesn't need, or he doesn't need the rape, he just needs the violence, because the violence equals sexual arousal because it was paired with that when he was a kid with his mom.
Right. Yeah. Oh, I'm getting like chills thinking about all this stuff, and it's really unusual that we can, find these things out. And there is that, it's weird to call it a pattern. I don't really like calling it a pattern, but I guess a commonality, I guess it's probably a better word in all these serial killers.
Yeah.
And I'm sure probably as time goes on, there may be more things that add to as you say, the blueprint of a serial killer. Because especially I think now more there's the issues with like online and AI and people that get obsessed with the AI girlfriends and the boyfriends. And, that's that could just add a whole new dimension to it when you think about it. Sounds like a scary movie.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, it really is. I know you said, the book just came out and it's doing great and as to be expected, and it's a very enjoyable book. And it's a good, almost like a psychological primer for people who don't understand a lot of that. You really break it down in the chapters when you're discussing these serial killers.
Yeah.
It's not too heavy.
Good. I'm glad
for anyone to understand. I didn't get lost, and I'm pretty dense, so, so I'm a good test dummy for all this, I guess. But we definitely want to tell people to check out the book. It is out on Amazon and anywhere you can get a book. And I know through our friends in Wild Blue Press, who are always so nice to me, and send me all these, and send me all the true crime people. Like, what are you trying to tell me, really? Being that you're taking a breather from your book, is there anywhere on social media where people can find out more about you?
I have a personal Instagram that is open. I also have a Threads account. I heard on your last podcast with the Tylenol Killer book that he created a Facebook page. I have not done that. I have a personal Facebook page. I don't have a author one yet, or I don't know if I should do one of those.
Okay.
But I do have Instagram and Threads, and I am Heather.Mro.
Okay. MRO.
Yep, that's
it. MRO? Okay. Right. So there you have it, folks. And again, the title of the book is Blueprint of a Killer, Monsters in the Making from Childhood to Murder. And this is Heather Mroczenski. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much to Heather Mroczenski for coming on the show. Be sure to check out her book. Again, that title is Blueprint of a Killer, Monsters in the Making from Childhood to Murder. And you can get that wherever fine publications are sold. And it's a real interesting book. Then you will really get some insight into some of these serial killers. Thanks so much, Heather. And if you want to hear more of this show, we're on Saturdays. We do Sherpa Selects, and that's where we highlight some of my favorite shows in the past seasons. I think we're up to like season 7 or something like that. We're winding down on that, and we get them remastered and pretty them up a little bit so you can enjoy them just a little bit more. And if you'd like to reach out, you can email me at jimthepodcastsherpa@gmail.com or follow me on our socials. That's Sherpalution for Instagram and Threads, and Sherpalution1, the number 1 after that, for TikTok if you'd like to leave a comment. So I appreciate any feedback that you'd have to offer, except maybe on the way that I dress. Just leave that alone. I think I look good in a prom gown. I guess that will do it for me. We will be back with a new episode next Wednesday. And we hope that you will join us and that you are subscribing and following and keeping this on your podcast playlist. And until then, I say, Viva la Sherpalution!
Thanks for listening to True Crime Screening Room. Subscribe to the show on podcast apps or the Sherpalution YouTube page. Until then, stay away from evil. And more important, Viva la Sherpalution!